either in person here in the room or via Zoom teleconference. Any person may address the commission on any item listed on this agenda. Persons wishing to speak on an item listed on the agenda will be heard when called by staff. You are welcome to speak for up to 3 minutes. Public comments from remote participants on Zoom will be audio only. This means members of the public wishing to address the commission will be allowed to speak live. However, their videos will not be shown and screen sharing will not be an option. Finally, since the city cannot guarantee the public access to teleconferencing technology will be uninterrupted, and the option for the public to participate remotely is only a courtesy. If technical difficulties arise for participants using the teleconferencing Zoom option, the meeting will continue unless otherwise required by the Brown Act. We appreciate your patience while we get used to this new audiovisual system that enables us to offer remote participation. With that, I would like to do a roll call. I'll start with Commissioner McCormick.
Present.
Commissioner Mason.
Present.
Commissioner Heising.
Present.
Commissioner Farsan.
Present.
Vice Chair Radnich.
Present.
Chair Labange. I'm showing Commissioner Sturm not present, and I'm not sure if she reached out. She did not to me, so I'm not sure. Okay. Can I have an adoption of the agenda? Can I get a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved.
Okay, all in favor, please.
Second.
Oh, sorry.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor,
Aye.
Aye.
all opposed? Okay, motion passes 6-0. Do we have any public comments not on tonight's agenda? Yeah.
We currently have no attendees in the room and no attendees on Zoom, so you have no public comments for items not on the agenda.
Telling you, we gotta open the windows. Thank you. Let's see, we have nothing on the consent calendar, so we will go to staff report, a ministerial review of SB 35 application. Staff, please take it away.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Commissioners. This is a brief staff report to inquire if the Planning Commission would like to review SB 35 applications. SB 35 was passed a few years ago, and the City of Lafayette is bringing its documents up to date so we can process these applications. The SB 35 process requires a 4-step general process. This includes an eligibility checklist submitted from the applicant. Staff will confirm that it is in fact eligible, at which point the applicant submits a preliminary application. This serves as notice that they plan to apply. Using this preliminary application, staff will notify all Native American tribes that have cultural or traditional standing in the area. Any tribes that wish to consult with the applicant have the right to do so. And if such consultation results in the applicant being allowed to submit an application, at that point, step 4, the applicant may submit an SB 35 application. It's step 4 that we're focused on tonight. This is the actual application. So if we get to that point, this application is required to be a ministerial application. There's no discretionary review allowed, but state law does allow it to be reviewed by staff or by a public hearing body. And so the question to you tonight is whether the Planning Commission would like to have these ministerial applications come to the body for review, or if they should remain with staff for this ministerial review. Staff's recommendation is that it remain with staff for the ministerial review, and this is because the public generally does not have a clear understanding of what ministerial versus discretionary means. While the public body would have a public hearing, the public could make comments. None of these would have, or none of the comments received from the public body or the public would have any bearing on what was allowed to take place or be required of the project. It's a simple yes or no. Does it meet the requirements, the objective standards that we would apply to it? If yes, we must approve it and no other changes can be required. Because of this, staff does recommend that it not be held as a public hearing, but rather as a staff review. And this is already done for SB 9 applications where we use a checklist at a staff level. So I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about this process and hear any comments you have.
Thank you. Does anyone have any clarifying questions? Commissioner McCormick?
Yeah, so I was looking, so SB 35, just to confirm, it's multi-unit housing, right? That
Technically, it starts at 2 units, but yes, it is
can
multi.
go all up to 150 or more.
Yes,
And when I was doing the reading, I thought it was only in place when you don't have a housing element approved. Is that correct, or is it always in place?
that is not correct. It is always in place.
Okay, and and so potentially going through this then, and there's a certain threshold for low income housing, right?
That's
Which
correct.
is pretty high, if I recall. It's like,
In
is it
this-
50%? I was
it's
unclear. I was like
50%.
20% or 50%. It was unclear on
It
the,
depends on the jurisdiction. HCD has made 2 levels of determination based on the history of the jurisdiction's provision of affordable housing. Lafayette is doing better than some other jurisdictions, and so the requirement is 50% as opposed to, I believe it's 10% in other jurisdictions.
right. So this is only approved for multi-unit housing where it's over 50%. So it's unlike, have we had, I'm sorry, I don't mean to kind of dominate, but have we had SB 35 applications?
We have not received any. My understanding is that there's one applicant currently that's interested in one, but has not submitted any of the paperwork.
Okay, and just one more, I guess, comment or whatever. I guess the only thing, I guess my only concern would be that if it happens to be a fairly large multi-unit, building or whatever, it's 30, 40 units, even if it qualifies, to have it kind of go through the process with no public hearing at all, even if we couldn't do anything about it, just to kind of like get it out in the public. I think that might I understand that it could be frustrating for the public if they kind of can't do anything about it, but at least but potentially have it like go under the radar completely seems a little scary. I mean, it's a 2-unit, I understand.
How about we do this? Let's
Sorry.
finish
That's all I have.
clarifying questions
I'm all
and
done.
then we'll
Thank you.
roundtable. Any? Commissioner Farsan?
So a quick question, if we go ministerial route, what's the notice to the public if there is an SB 35 when you get to step 4?
There's typically no notice. That is something that could be determined. And just to clarify, it would be ministerial either way. It's the question of
Yes.
who would do the reviewing. So no matter who reviews it, we would basically create a checklist. We have already created a submittal guidelines checklist, and we would use the general plan, the zoning code, and the objective design standards we have for multifamily apartments and developments, to review it, to review against it. If it meets all of those standards, there's nothing we can do to deny it.
Yeah, you understand about the denial part. It's just a notice to the public. So there is not a requirement to provide notice to the public that they could come to the administrative determination at the staff level to comment there.
There's no requirement of notice. There's also no prohibition. If the planning commission asked to see these applications, we could choose to notice to our usual 300-foot buffer, to any other size buffer. We could do a newspaper notice. Those are options.
Yeah, and when we comment, I'll follow up on what Commissioner McCormick was getting at too about that. Thank you, appreciate it.
Commissioner Heising?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So this step 4 in the process, I get the whole ministerial, whether staff does it or it goes to planning commission. That's just for the application to be received and the project to be deemed eligible to move forward. The question is, for anything like objective standards, or it's going to come back to design review, the project itself later, correct?
No. The entire review will be conducted ministerially. It does not automatically require review by any body. So step 4 is after we've determined that this qualifies as an SB 35 application and that the Native American tribes consulted, if any, have reached a satisfactory understanding of what will be done, if any, remains are found, et cetera. And at that point, they're allowed to submit an application, which is the ministerial application. And that is the only review of the project.
Got it. Thanks.
Commissioner Mason?
I understand the ministerial review. I also understand people in Lafayette. We've had several projects that have ended up being challenged in court. So how does that whole process play out? Because without notice in ministerial, how do people know where they would hate to have it halfway construction, then all of a sudden a lawsuit that everybody gets upset. Could you walk me through that process?
As discussed, the notice is not something that's required by the state law. This is the city of Lafayette implementing state law. So there's no specific notice that's required, but that does not mean that the city could not choose to do noticing, whether it's reviewed by staff or by the planning commission or city council. Will have this same staff report at the city council level. So we could implement a noticing process for SB 35 applications.
And then correct me, I just want to make sure I understand. So if it's ministerial, does that mean that the records, drawings, et cetera, are available to the public if they want to come down to the office to look at them?
All documents submitted to planning department are always public record.
Okay, thank you.
Standards, I know it should be black and white, right? You need 6 feet of setback. You either have it or you don't. Is there ever situations on that where maybe it's gray or they say, well, could we get a variance for 5? And then does it become discretionary? And what would happen in those situations?
In my mind, the point of a ministerial process is that it is a clean yes or no. If they do not have the 5 feet of setback, then that is a no. And they do not meet the requirements and they do not qualify for a ministerial approval.
So then they either have to go through the normal process or they have to get
That's
6 feet.
The goal of this is to provide what's known as the streamlined ministerial approval process. So if you can check all the boxes, then you are qualified to have this faster review process. If you don't, the normal review process is still available.
Okay, thank you. Anybody, any other clarifying? Do we have to have public comments on this one? Okay, so are there any public comments? The over under is 0. Okay, so we will close public comments and we will open it up for the planning commission to discuss. Whoever wants to go first. Commissioner Farsan, please.
So I'm completely open to staff walking through the process and not the planning commission. I don't have that kind of ego at all. My only issue is some form of notice to the public so they know something is happening, even though it's not required. I would like there to be
it isn't like it is. I'm just worried that it could be a very large, I mean, we already kind of get this, at least I've heard this feedback, you know, like, oh, what this thing just kind of showed out of nowhere. It's like we say, oh, hey, it went through planning commission, it went through, you know, it actually had its day in the sun. I could just imagine some sort of large, it could be a large development, you know, as you said, I mean, I looked at the thing, it's like, you know, there's a certain different criteria for like under 150 units or above 150 units and whatever. But so it's like, it feels like removing ourselves from that gatekeeping process. It feels like even though we would just, I understand, we would just do the ministerial kind of like, oh yes, just check all the boxes. It feels like it'd be at least our duty to make sure that it has a public hearing, you have a chance to at least have people make comments, you know, which could impact, you know, overall sentiment or whatever. So I don't know, that's my concern, you know, that it could be large, we just don't know, and make a blanket statement saying we'll never look at it. Seems hard to know.
Any other Commissioner Heising, excuse me. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chair.
Haven't seen you in a while.
I agree with Commissioner Farsan that I think it's totally appropriate for staff to go through the checklist and do the ministerial part of step 4 of the application. But something you just said about a public hearing, my understanding is there would never be a public hearing. So the public, since it is ministerial, that's what I was getting at earlier. Well, is there another bite at the apple? When the project moves farther along, does it come before design review? But if that's not the case, then there never will be a public hearing. So I totally agree. I think in full transparency, there's got to be a way we just at least inform the public, and whether it's in the weekly newsletter that goes out and just says, hey, FYI, because at the end of each Friday newsletter, there's a section where you can click on the link and you can see all the planning applications and all the projects in town. And maybe we just have a subcategory SB, what is it? 35 applications. And we probably need to educate, because most of the public's not going to know what SB 35 is. So unless they've read up on it and are tracking everything. So I think there can be an easy way where we can be fully transparent. I don't want to make it onerous on staff. I don't want it to come to us and be onerous on the full commission. So those are my thoughts at the moment.
Commissioner Mason?
I have, my thoughts on this is that, well, first of all, I think that as a body, our job is to, I don't want to say act as a buffer, but we, in a sense, represent the community. It's important to me, and I'm assuming most everybody else here, that regardless of how we rule, everybody should get a fair hearing and walk away getting a fair hearing. If memory serves me correctly, there was a time when the terraces was more than 50% affordable housing, if not completely affordable housing. Right when the court started getting right at the beginning. If that was the case, that would have fallen under SB 35. And
It was before that. That was before.
I know, it was before that, but if that came back again, or for example, the project right across the street, if that came back and all of a sudden it was 4 stories and no notice, we have a hard enough time convincing the public that we're not public enemy number one, just when we deal with the density bonuses. And they have time to yell at us in that. This is so I do believe there should be ministerial review, but I believe that there should be a threshold at which, yes, we will make a full presentation and we can make it clear that, hey, we don't have any say, it is ministerial only, but we should at least be educating the public, and they shouldn't have to go to, 10 lines down on the website, say, oh, by the way, there's a 315 unit project coming in and you have no say in it.
That's a good point. Vice Chair Radnich?
Okay, so I'm gonna take a different stance on this. My take is that SB 35 is a very black and white law. Some people view that as positive, some people view that as negative, but it is. So there's also criteria for proximity to transit. So the fact that it has been in effect for 5.5 years, Lafayette hasn't seen an application. We're not suddenly going to get a flood of applications. And if we do, it's the developer's right. So again, maybe that's good, maybe it's bad, but that is just the reality. And I think our staff has other things that they can better spend their time on, and that the Planning Commission can spend their time on, because I do understand the desire to, or, the shared consensus that people would like for the public to have an opportunity for a fair hearing. But by the time it comes for the approval, it's already basically passed because they've met the objective standards. And so I feel that we'd also then be creating a false sense of input that the community is able to provide. I think where we would be better served is making sure our objective standards are dialed in and revisiting those down the road. So, and then the other thing is I heard a couple of comments on, the size and maybe the threshold. And so while I don't disagree that a large development or even a 6-unit development showing up when you're not expecting it, that could be jarring, right? But the number or the percentage of affordability in my mind is still a number of units. It doesn't matter what income level those units are, being given out at or rented out at. So in my mind, SB 35 is what it is. I don't think it's a good use of staff's resources or our resources to have it come to us. And the noticing, I think it's unfortunate in my opinion, because I would want to know if it was happening next door to me. But the noticing, most of the community doesn't live within 300 feet of a given site where this may happen. So I would make no changes.
Thank you. Let me, I want to say something and then I'll go back just so I get something in before you guys take all the meat. Didn't tell me this job. I get nothing to say by the time it's my turn to talk.
Ditto.
So I have been a developer in my life, so I do want to just give a perspective on how I see SB 35 playing out a little. The last few years, we've had the pandemic, we've had inflation. I think there's been a lot of dynamics that have stopped housing to a certain degree. We're also in a very expensive place to develop. Ultimately, when a new system gets put in and it affects the valuation of developments, ultimately that will translate to the value of the land to the highest and best value. And when that happens and the people who own the land accept that, because usually people only remember the offer they got 10 years ago at $1 gazillion that nobody will ever pay again. But when it resets, sorry if that happened to you, but so when it resets to what it should be based on the state trying to make housing easier to do, which I support, these should go faster. Now that could be 5, 10, 15 years, or it could be 2 years, who knows? So with that in mind, I think the possibility for this to become a bigger issue than it is there. So I was thinking sort of in between a little that we would have, I definitely think there should be, so I wrote a few things. One of them was, I think we should relook at this each year if we should just continue with whatever we decide now. So whatever we do is not in perpetuity. We might think from a year from now, oh, we didn't really do it right. And I'm assuming from staff, we could adjust something later if we didn't like how it was going. So I would propose that. I would also say, maybe we set a threshold for size of property development units that should be at least mentioned in the planning director's report. As FYI, we got a preliminary application that's doing, whatever the number is, 45, whatever number we set as a threshold. I don't think it needs to be too low. And then the only other thing I was thinking about when we did the review of, I forgot the name of it, where the Blockbuster video is. You remember the review there when we really didn't have a lot of discretion, yet we came up with something that stepped it back so that it wasn't a big wall? The applicant didn't have to do it, but they did because maybe they said, oh, that's actually a better idea. And I can still, and they ended up, I think they actually got a little more density out of it anyways. I'd be bummed if we, if it's not going to planning or the DRC, is anyone looking at it to make sure what gets built, So I like the idea of at some threshold of a bigger one that it comes here. Now, I guess in talking, if it comes in front of us, the applicant doesn't present. There's no questions. Is that correct? Would they wouldn't present, or we could ask them to just explain it, but there would be no questions really.
I think it's important to distinguish between a public hearing and what let's call a public review. So this would be a ministerial review in the same setting as a public hearing. Public hearing is a very specific term. It requires noticing, et cetera. So we're not talking about that. That's discretionary. But a public review could still look like a public hearing. It could have a staff presentation, a developer could get up and speak, there could be public comment. It could be run very similarly. However, the more similarly it's run, the more confusion there may be. So even with very clear statements at the beginning of such public review, I think it would be potentially frustrating to members of the public making comments.
Thank you. I agree. I think all of these new state laws are confusing. And so some of these are going to just have to be reiterated every time. So I'm going to stop and let it, but my idea is that we have a lower threshold for just being noticed, just so we know. And that could just be in the planning director's report. By the way, there's 2 that are 50 and above, and here's where they are. That's it. And then that we have maybe a higher threshold for ones that get put on the agenda for I'm sorry, what was it, discussion item? What you call it?
Public review.
Public review. So there's no discretionary. And we'd really try to limit it to just and be informative to the public, hear it. And it's almost like, okay, now it's on the public record. This is coming. You don't watch planning commission, you're gonna miss this, you know. We'll have the windows open, people will be here. We're gonna have crowds again. We can sell popcorn. I mean, there's a lot of things we can do. And public outreach. All right. Vice Chair Radnich.
So a clarifying question, if, it sounds like from your suggestion would be that it come to planning commission just for a review meeting, we'll say. Would it still be on a Monday night during a normal planning commission agenda? It would just be a different type of item. Is that the thought? Because I could see that could create a lot of confusion as well. Or would it be a whole separate day and time?
I don't know that there are any stipulations in state law. I could look again. My understanding is that it's very brief in state law. It simply says public bodies may review as long as it is not discretionary. So that would be up to the planning commission and the planning director to determine what kind of hearing it took place or what kind of review and what the meeting looked like.
Okay, thanks. And then to your point, Chair, about noticing depending on the size. I don't think it's the size as much of the issue that's jarring as the fact that it's an SB 35 application. So my suggestion would be that if we were going to put anything in the director's report, no matter the size, if it's 2 units or however many, because 6 units immediately adjacent to somebody could be a bigger, I'm just going to say impact or, potential impact than 40 units on another parcel. So I would be hesitant to set a unit number threshold. Those are my thoughts.
That's a good point. Commissioner McCormick?
Yeah, I think I think your points are valid, and I guess I was thinking the threshold's a good idea, but maybe it's not but I think to flip it the other way, you say we don't want to take a whole lot of staff time or whatever. It's like there aren't that many right now, right? So I don't think it doesn't seem like it would be that much extra time. If there's never been any and there's one pending, well, there's not that much extra time doing it themselves or bringing it to us. I just feel like I think there is the concern that the public might get confused and angry if they're here, but you know what? To Commissioner Mason's point, it's like, we're kind of like the buffer, right? If they're angry, if they might be angry at us and confused, they're gonna be angrier at city council or whatever, if this thing starts going up without any sort of true public kind of at least airing of the device. And as you mentioned, like what you did with the Blockbuster project or whatever, that was, as you say, you probably didn't have a whole lot of control, but just kind of the feedback and the conversation helped, right? Even though they didn't have to do it. And I could envision something like that. I guess I would just maybe suggest there's another way. It's like you say, let's not do it and then review it and see if we need to. Why don't you do it the other way? Why don't we just say, yeah, let's do it. And if it becomes too onerous, they can kind of flip it. It kind of goes both ways. I did also read, I think SB 35 is expiring and sunsetting in less than 2 years. And there's a Senator Wiener's proposed like a super 35. I think it's gonna kind of be in there. So this was to be with us for a long time. And so I think understanding how we're gonna handle this now is probably easier because it's gonna get more intense later.
Commissioner Mason?
It's a good point on Blockbuster, and that got me thinking about just design review spends even more time. Let's think about how much time we spend just on color. You need every objective. It could be bright pink or whatever. So, I'm an engineer, as long as it doesn't fall down. Okay, but some people really, really get particular about color, and that's why we spend so much time on it. So that to me leads to some, should be some notification, so even if the things that they can't pick color, at least telling people, hey, you know, maybe a more neutral color, something like that, which may not make a big difference to them, but at least gives them a chance to be a good community, sponsor and work with the community.
So you're saying by coming.
By
in
getting
front of-
our,
okay.
by getting comments, at least
Right.
standing in front of the community, taking all the arrows.
Sure, Farsan?
I appreciate everybody's comments. I will note, just practically speaking, if a developer is coming in on an SB 35 project, they don't care what you have to say. They're done with the project. Let's just be practical here. And I remember the project up there. We had a couple of meetings, but that was the discretionary. That was a project where they did listen because there were changes. If you're hitting the SB 35, the developer is now listening for changes. For clarity, even if we go forward, that's what you would have to tell the public so they fully understood. You can be here all day and the developer doesn't have to do anything. This is a checkbox meeting is what I would call that. I just don't want that to get lost.
So why do it? Why have that meeting and why waste staff's time to create a staff report, try to get the developer to come here? As Vice Chair Radnich said earlier, this is a black and white process. It's streamlining. We're basically undoing what the law has required, that we have a ministerial process to process the project. If the project application checks all the boxes, let's just keep it simple. No threshold. It doesn't come back to us. It just goes on the weekly newsletter or the planning director's report at the end of a meeting and tells us, oh, hey, by the way, we had SB 35 application come in. It was blah, blah, blah. And it shows up on the city manager newsletter. Because back to what the vice chair said, you're setting false expectations. You set a meeting, you put on an agenda, you have, if you can even get the developer to come and make the presentation, why would the developer do that if they have already got an approved project? So say you can get a developer to do that, the public comes, they think they have a say in something. They don't. They can't talk about the color. They can't talk about the number of stories. I think we're creating a problem if we go down that rabbit hole.
Vice
So
Chair?
just simple
Yeah.
transparency, just matter of fact, these are applications that came in, these are projects that move forward, period.
Vice Chair Radnick?
Yeah, and I just want to make sure that as we're up here speaking, that we are correctly, speaking to our best, that we can of facts, right? So like planning commission, color is not in our purview, right?
Okay.
The project at Blockbuster, or the old Blockbuster, that was not an SB 35 application. That was a discretionary. So we were able to make suggestions and the applicant, received our suggestions and changed them. I think where we would be better served, again, was like tightening up our objective standards. And I think we also need to give credit to a developer and to staff. Like if a developer can come in and they meet the criteria that the state set up, good for them. And I'm guessing that staff maybe can, if they don't already, at least share, hey, these are the color palette that we typically like to see in Lafayette. Hey, here's this. But to think that a developer would come here, I mean, I wouldn't. If I had an opportunity to do an SB 35 application, I wouldn't even speak in front of the planning commission. I would choose not to, because anything we share, it's like it's too late in the game. So I would think that staff, through the process of receiving the pre-application, well, maybe I can ask staff, is there information you share back with the developer of here's the objective standards, but here's also what Lafayette likes to see, even though we understand,
we haven't had one yet, so there isn't an established process. We could certainly share any of the kind of guidelines that we have. We would need to be very explicit that there was no expectation that they were followed, that there was no requirement. I think that there is some gray area there where there should just be no appearance of pressure, if that makes sense. But we
Yeah.
can certainly say, for your information, these exist.
Yeah, thank you. And so I guess my last point to that, excuse me, is that even with the discretionary approval that we've been having over, I'll just say the last 5 years, the product type all looks pretty similar, right? Because the market's driving it. So I just don't think it's necessary for the planning commission to create a false sense to the public that comments are going to be received and addressed personally.
Let me address a little, because I think these are all good points, and I'm glad we're having this discussion because clearly we have a bevy of opinion. I'm not worried about, well, and whether, to be honest, whether the applicant actually showed up doesn't really, I don't care. I want to have it in front of a public. I want to have it so that the public sees what's coming, because it's not going to be seen. And it gives us protection a little bit, because it's like, hey, look, we have no discretionary, but this is coming. But I understand that the overhead part about making more reports and stuff. We don't even know if we'll have any, but I understand that. What I'm really, really, really afraid of is objective standards. The problem with objective standards is you don't know where they're missing until they miss. Because it's just like anything is, the more you try to constrain to make exactly what you want, the more something pops out here, pops out here. So someday we're going to have a project get approved or be approved administerially. And we're not going to know till it's built what a horrific mistake we made. What a horrific mistake we made. And it might be the color or the design. There's so many things. So my only hope in doing this is because I don't know what the staff, and maybe this is a good question for staff. If you see something that meets the objective standards, but you're like, this is an abomination, what are you going to do?
There's nothing that we can.
No, I know there's nothing you can do, but that doesn't mean you can't say, you can say stuff, you just can't direct them. That's where I'm worried.
The commission is asking all the questions that are appropriate and specific to, we as staff interact with, liaise, talk to applicants about the community's preferences around design, from the smallest project to the biggest project, and that we ask developers. There's no obligation for anyone to talk to their neighbor, but we highly encourage it. And so we will always convey what we would like to see and what we would ask, but for an SB 35, they're under no obligation to do it because they have met the bottom line checklist. And I think what the chair has correctly identified is that there is no good design by numbers, to my knowledge. I mean, we can try to establish setbacks and step backs and certain things, but any of those standards could always be contorted to produce a hideous product. And there have been spiteful applications in other communities that are examples of that. And I'm sure you've seen some. I think I rest assured that, what we are talking about with SB 35 applications, that there is a substantial cost to doing them. And the developer's interest is, as a builder, to get their investment back out of it. And so it's in their best interests to make a handsome, desirable project. And that gives me comfort, knowing that there will always be loopholes with any objective standards. I think that I have faith that they ultimately want to do the best product they can, best project they can, while still making their bottom line. And I think there is a lot of, I mean, Vice Chair Radnich said, you know, the form factor is being driven by the market, and that includes construction type, construction costs, and you name it. So while certain features would be more desirable from a aesthetic standpoint, they're just, the cost benefit of doing that doesn't tip it towards that for kind of the product type that we're talking about. So we will always convey to an applicant and have a conversation. And my experience is they will always say, we will do everything we can to a point. And that point is being able to essentially do the project and make it pencil.
Thank you. Commissioner Mason?
Yeah, I have a little bit of a different experience. This is basically what I do, and I've seen a significant number of projects where everything's fine, then all of a sudden somebody's really upset. So they file suit. A good attorney could delay it for a couple of years, and that couple of year delay has a cost to the developer. And then in the end, they work some sort of agreement and they each get half of what they want, and then all the problems go away. I've been to any number of one where they didn't even bother to pretend that they had a project. I've done some of those apartments in downtown Walnut Creek were delayed. Well, just about every project similar from here to Dublin at one point was delayed over whether it should be commercial prevailing wage or residential prevailing wage. And the longer drawn out, the more expensive it was for the developer. So my general feeling on how we do it is the more information gets out there, whether the developer wants to take advantage of the community or not. I think he would be foolish just to disregard everything. Let's face it, this is Lafayette. Every third or fourth person is an attorney anyway, and they can make life miserable.
But I mean, just to counter that, the quicker this goes through, the less chance it will get sued before it's already perfected. I mean, that could still stop it, but and I'm not trying to advocate for that because I don't want that.
Jobs that were shut down in the middle of construction.
Okay, sorry. Commissioner Farsan?
Just a quick response, but I completely understand that, but we're sitting here as a planning commission speaking on behalf of the city. Those are private matters, and I don't want to be involved in making decisions between developers and people who might sue them or vice versa. So I understand where you're coming from, but that's not our job to get in between that or liaise, so to speak, between them. So I just want to make sure for the public, not on this project, but we do have a lot of private things that come to us and wonder why we don't take care of them. And our response is we can't. So I don't want that to be lost on the public here if they hear this.
And just on the point of litigation, while I think anyone can file any lawsuit at any time for any reason, the avenue that has been pursued most frequently by opponents of projects has been challenging the CEQA. And I think the legislature was cognizant of that when they adopted SB 35 and explicitly made SB 35 projects exempt from CEQA as a category. And so it takes away that vulnerability from the project. And as a ministerial action, the avenue of even challenging a discretionary action by the city, be it the planning commission or ultimately the city council, that avenue is also foreclosed. So I have not heard of an SB 35 project being challenged, and if and when one does, I don't know what grounds that they would challenge on. But I think that the legislature was cognizant of with the intention to streamline and to safeguard against what have historically been the easiest or the most vulnerable aspects of an approval. to, if nothing else, delay and kind of extort some concessions.
How about this, you guys? In the interest of time, given the recommendation of staff, could we just go across real quick and say relative to that, can you live with it? Do you? What? Oh, so you have another point?
Well, I was going to say that we really appreciate the commission's concern about sort of being informed, both as commissioners and I think informing the public of applications. And Commissioner Heising noted that we maintain a monthly list of all applications that have come in. So, and in every weekly roundup, the link is right there. So if you are a person who's curious about what planning applications come in, and there are many people, and certain types of applications have been of interest, like SB 9, because that was new legislation recently, they're listed in there. We would list those, an SB 35 project in that list, but that requires proactive looking for those. We could also make it part of a report out to the commission and to the city council with the city manager's update. And we can also, if the commission recommends, do a direct mailing to what historically would be a notice of public hearing, but this is just simply a notice that there's an SB 35 application that's been filed. It's ministerial and will be handled in the prescribed manner. So the public would be informed, there just would not be a public hearing on it. So that's an option for the commission to
Could I
consider.
ask one other option? If we ask to have them and I'm not positive at the right trigger point, but let's say it's the pre-application. And if preliminary application, not maybe, or maybe it's the actual completed application, whichever one's right. But at that point, if it was in the planning director's report that got discussed here. I guess I was thinking pre-application. Because let's say there was some really big one that came up, we're like, maybe we ought to get in front of this and, bring it back as what's the right phrase, ministerial review and no questions asked kind of presentation. I mean, in that sense, it would be a catch-all. We wouldn't have a hard and fast rule. We'd say, hey, when we see it, we'll know. And that's when we'd say, could we please bring that back to just have a little more light shown on it?
Correct. So if it were routinely a matter of me reporting out on any SB 35 pre-application filings, and you identified one that you wanted to alert the public to in a greater manner, you could ask for it to be agendized. There's no discretion you could exercise.
Right.
It would just be an informational item.
Okay, well, thank you. So bring back to where I was going, and that's just one of the things. I would just ask everyone to say, given with what the recommendation is, are you good with it as is? Is there anything you want to add or subtract? And let's just try to get to some consensus and move on. Anyone want to go first? I'll wait till the end of this time.
So you're just asking
It's almost like,
us to answer what staff's asked us.
I want us to
do
just
it
talk it out. real quick.
ministerial?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm
You're
all for
minister.
staff doing it ministerially. Now, do you want to? Are we starting a whole discussion again about what we want to do as far as?
I guess what I'm trying to get at is how close are we? And then can we just do a
I
motion?
think we all agree that,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to speak for everyone else, but it
Yeah.
sounds like we all agree that staff does the application, step 4 of the application process ministerially.
I could just ask for,
No?
I don't think that's the case.
I don't think
I don't think that's the case. to be fair.
That's my position.
Yeah.
so let's just do it real quick again. So you're all for ministerial staff.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say? Okay. And then can we just?
Right, yeah, I would be in favor of a public hearing.
Okay,
I mean, there's other caveats, but that would be I'd rather err on the side of airing it early and
Okay.
often.
and I'm gonna jump over.
I agree. I'm on the side of public hearing.
Okay.
Ministerial with some form of notice.
And then Vice Chair.
I'm sorry, for clarity, it's it's ministerial for either staff ministerial plus notice for clarity.
Ministerial staff plus notice, okay. Vice Chair.
Staff, yeah, just staff review and then mailers for 300 feet.
Okay, and then I would be staff review. Mentioned in planning director's report. With the option to. Bring back to a meeting as a administerial review of non-discretion. Look, that's where I am. Which is kind of a hybrid, I think. So anybody want to make a motion?
I don't think we have.
So is it
Might.
3-3?
I mean, we could make a motion and then it gets crafted like.
Yeah,
that's how it
I'll make a
works, right?
motion.
All right,
Can
So I make-
can I ask a quick question
Yeah.
before you do that? So can you explain, because you just did a 3-step, you said staff, planning director, but then it could still come to us. So how does it jump from the planning director to us?
are you asking me?
Yes,
Yeah, okay.
that was.
So at a meeting tonight, like for instance, when it gets to planning director's report, the planning director would say, we have a new pre-application for a 56 unit SB 35 project at, Main and Main. Oh, okay. Hey, guys, we might even do a vote on it, a roundtable. Does anyone want to have this come back as a discussion item, administerially non-discretionary review? And I don't think the applicant needs to come. I don't, because they don't really, they're not beholden to us. So I'm not worried about that. I just want to get it out in front of the public. That's my answer.
That helps, thank you.
So what about this? For those planning commissioners that want to hear the item, why can't they just attend the staff's ministerial review?
I think it's a public notice, the public
Yeah.
comment period issue, I think.
Okay,
That'd be my thing. Yeah, it's not really for me to hear.
I got it. Can I make a motion?
Yeah.
All right. My motion is it's ministerially reviewed by staff. The planning director in his or her report at the end of planning commission meetings announces it. It's in the weekly newsletter via the link. So any member of the public can click on the link. And then at the city manager's report out at the end of the city council meeting, the same project at roughly the same time is announced. So the public hears it at 2 public meetings and it's on the weekly newsletter on the link. And that's it. That's my motion.
Here, let me ask a question. Do we ask to amend before the second or after? If you wanted to amend.
You could try to make a friendly amendment, but if you
Right.
do something I don't like, I won't
Right.
accept it.
I just don't remember if it's before or after a second.
I have a friendly amendment.
Yeah, that's fine, I know.
There you go.
Yeah.
So, it sounds like from staff's communication that the notice or that applications received, or let me ask, are all applications that are received by the city included on the links that are already on the weekly emails, the applications receive links? Or just certain ones?
It is the predominance. So I think we do not include Public Records Act requests and a couple kind of things like that. We include tree permits, design review, links, any of the standard applications, and we would commit to include, we do include SB 9, we would include SB 35, because the whole point of that report and that webpage is to inform the public who's interested and to put it out there. It's only those like Public Records Act requests or like things that we don't publish.
Okay, thank you. So my friendly amendment would be the hearing that staff is already communicating development applications received. I think if any notice were to be given out, the immediate neighbors, while all of Lafayette has potential to drive by, you know, Project X, it's the immediate neighbors within the 300 feet who will be potentially most impacted. So my amendment would be as written, staff ministerial approval, which is the law, without a public hearing before the planning commission or without a public review in front of the planning commission. But with the 300-foot noticing. So just tweaking the noticing.
It's just adding the noticing to what I proposed.
Yeah,
Yeah,
correct,
and
because
would
I
do
should have
that, I
just
would
reworded
have to
it.
do it. So
Okay.
I like your addition. I accept your friendly amendment.
Okay, perfect.
Does anyone else have any?
But to confirm, so just to check, right? So, I mean, what the chair was suggesting too is also it gets read out at the end of a meeting. and
Right.
We decide whether to take it as a public hearing. That's not
no,
part
no,
of
that's
your,
not
that's not your thing.
That's
Okay,
not
That's not your thing. Okay, that's what I'm confirming. Okay.
So can I make a second if I made the friendly amendment that the first accepted? Okay, second.
So we can still ask for friendly amendments.
Hey,
after
go
this.
for it.
Right. Sure. Did anyone else have anything or is everyone else good? By the way, I am on the planning application received after going to the newsletter because I hadn't looked at it before. And I'm gonna tell you, nobody's gonna ever find it here, so.
I click on it every week.
Nobody.
I look
who-
at it every
no- Nobody
week.
who doesn't, you're on the planning commission. You should.
No, we
I-
get
I
the
should.
email.
No, but I'm just saying, it's not, there's somebody's gonna start construction one day and be like, what? the
Well, that's
heck?"
where the 300-foot notice.
Yeah, I know, I get it, but that's on a 2-unit SB 35.
No, on anyone.
Right, well, that's what I'm saying, on a 2-unit SB 35, do we really need to spend the money for 300 feet notice? I don't
This
think
is a
so.
few stamps and a letter.
That's why I wanted to have just a little bit of us to make a decision. We get paid a lot of money. We should make decisions here.
Oh, please don't say that. We do not get paid any money, just for the record.
I think the court would recognize that was humor. We do
Yeah.
not get paid money. Okay. All right, so you're not gonna, okay, I guess since you're not gonna take my friendly
No.
ad, right? Okay, so then we've had a second. So all in favor,
I,
all opposed?
Nay.
Christina should have been.
Okay, so we have the vote was 3-3 with Commissioner McCormick, Commissioner Mason and Chair Labange in the nay. The other one's in the yay. So round 2.
Well. I'm not gonna propose anything. I was just gonna make, one other comment. I will note, if there is going to be a substantial project on the SB 35 level in Lafayette,
Mhm.
there are people who are going to know that project is going to happen.
No doubt.
Before we know it's going to happen. I will leave it at that. So I'm not concerned about that. Again, I'm all in favor. You've probably heard it from me for multiple years. The more people have a chance to get their views, the better it is for everyone. I just think, again, in this context, it's going to be the worst if it happens because it will be something where their views will mean, and unfortunately, I don't mean this in a bad way, nothing because it's ministerial. So that, yeah, I just want to make sure I put that out there and I'll defer to Commissioner Mason, who appears to want to make a motion.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that I agree with Chair.
Okay. Hold on a sec, sorry. Planning Director, please.
So we heard Commissioner Heising's motion second, and there was a vote on that. And we heard the chair's desire to have the ability to ask for an item, an SB 35 application to appear on an upcoming agenda. I don't see an inconsistency between those two, between the motion and what you would ask, because as a matter of practice, the planning director would report out at this meeting, and the city manager would report out at a city council meeting that an SB 35 pre-application submittal has been received, putting the hearing body on notice. And if it pleases the commission, you could ask for that informational item to come back on a future agenda. The purpose, the expressed purpose being to have more public, not over, I don't want to use oversight, but basically
Visibility.
to let the public know in a greater fashion. Besides those which were already part of the motion. So I'm not seeing an inconsistency between what you would ask for, which was reporting out, and the ability to ask for it to go on a future agenda with the motion.
Okay,
And
well then,
And correct me if I'm wrong. I've seen it where a single member of the body has asked for something to come back. Do you have to vote? Does there have to be a majority of the body that wants to hear it? Or can it be brought back just, like if the mayor asked for something to be brought back, you would bring it back, right? Or would they all vote on it? Would we all vote on it? Because it's brought up during
We would ask that a majority
Got it.
support the
If we
matter
could
coming
decide right
back.
then and there, like
Okay.
if it's a 56
Yeah.
unit,
right.
maybe it makes sense. Maybe I,
Why do you take my friendly amendment?
well, no,
No,
not that it's a matter of course that they all automatically get brought back.
oh, I agree. I don't want
Okay.
that. That's not what I said, but I hear you. I hear you. And I hear the plan director. So let's do this. Did you have something dissimilar or do you want to?
I just wanted to know from the planning director, what degree of specificity would you say, hey, we had SB 35 coming up? Well, where, how large, how
Alright.
tall, things like that, so we could at least have enough information to make the decision on whether or not we want to
I think it's
bring it back.
robust enough that we'd understand.
Yeah, Greg would describe it.
Yeah, yeah.
And then we would be educated about it and then,
It would just.
so I'll
give us
take your
enough.
friendly emotion. Your,
Or we don't even need it, I think. So how
I
about
think
this?
it's covered.
Let's
yeah.
go back to, if
Yeah.
you guys are okay with this, we go back to that and vote again on the exact same one that you amended. Because we don't need to amend it to bring it back.
Yeah, yeah.
So we need a new motion because we denied it.
Okay, well, we need the motion.
I was
again.
gonna say that for
Okay.
process and
All
for
right.
clarity, I want to make sure that it's by majority of, and not a single member can do it. If that is what it is, then I want to vote specifically on that issue, because if that's what it's gonna be, we're not really giving them the authority. If everybody can
agree.
say, I want it back. I just want clarity that it's a
All
majority
right, well,
that would
let's,
require.
maybe
it.
someone can put that in the emotion.
Okay, I'll do it. Okay,
Go up, you're up.
my same motion, do I have to repeat it all?
I don't need you to.
My same motion, plus when it comes back at the end of the meeting with planning director's report and we hear what it is, we can confer amongst ourselves and decide if we want it to be brought back
By majority.
by majority
the-
based on the description.
And the
With-
300
with the-
feet.
With the friendly amendment. You said.
Yeah,
you
yeah.
Plus the friendly amendment. just
Yeah.
For
with the-
clarity.
With the noticing,
The 300
radius
feet.
of noticing.
Okay. All right, do we have a second?
Well, can I ask a question? If this is already allowed for any item that the director shares,
Why do we have to?
why are we adding it to our motion?
Well, I don't think it matters. That's why I was said, bring back your exact same motion and we'll vote on that again. But it's the same thing. So we can split hairs and discuss splitting hairs, or we can just.
Or we
split
could
hairs.
talk for another hour.
So I think, I think the planning director said we don't need to have that part to do it. So if you just go back to your exact one you had before, but I
Then
would
we
be
vote.
willing to vote on it again with the amended one that Vice Chair Radnich did.
Yeah.
And I may or may not change my vote.
Okay, all right. So my motion is the same one I made before with the friendly amendment from Vice Chair Radnich.
All right, do we have a second?
Second,
All right, all in favor?
I,
All opposed?
Nay,
Okay, let the record reflect that 5 in the yay and Commissioner Mason was a nay. The motion passed. Thank you. Now we get to public. Public stuff. All right, sorry, I get my game face on here. All right, so I guess now next will be continued public hearing, safety element update. Staff, if you're ready, please take it away.
Thank you, commissioners. So as you recall, the Planning Commission first reviewed the safety element in May on the 15th. We received comments regarding changes that were requested. We made these changes and are now returning for a second review of the safety element. The staff report contains 2 questions regarding whether the safety element is now ready for review, and if there are changes, if they are of a minor enough nature to be made at a staff level before moving on to City Council. With that, I will turn it over to Eli Crespi of PlaceWorks for a PowerPoint presentation.
Good evening, Commission members. Eli Crespi with PlaceWorks. Could we have the presentation loaded, please?
Are you asking?
Thank you.
From back there.
Yeah,
It worked.
and next slide, please. Thank you. So the safety element, as you may recall, is a mandatory component of the city's general plan with the primary intent to help protect the city against natural disasters and related public safety concerns. Recent changes to state law require that the safety element be updated at least once every 8 years, ideally concurrent with the housing element. And since the city's current safety element was first adopted in 2002 with some revisions in 2009, it is well due now for an update. Next slide, please. There have been several changes to state law since the safety element was adopted, and the bulk of the edits to the safety element have focused on these revised requirements that are now in state law. There are requirements to add more details and more policies related to flooding and wildfires, mapping, and policies related to new development primarily. The state now requires that the city safety element include what is called a climate change vulnerability assessment to look at the populations and assets in the city that are most vulnerable to climate change and related hazards, and that there be policies in the safety element to improve resilience to these hazards. And there are requirements to include identification of areas that may be constrained during evacuation, and the routes that could be used for an evacuation, and some of the capacity and constraint issues associated with those routes. Next slide, please. There are a few other changes that we have made. We have updated the mapping that is in the safety element. We have revised some of the technical background information where there is new information that is available. We have expanded the policies and the programs in the safety element to better reflect the current conditions in Lafayette, to integrate best practices that have been developed over the past 10 to 15 years, and to address new areas of concern to the community. We have also more thoroughly integrated the Contra Costa Local Hazard Mitigation Plan, which was last adopted in 2018, and other recent planning-related efforts to ensure that the safety element is part of a more holistic and well-integrated approach to adaptation and safety planning in the community. So the safety element went through several GPAC meetings, most recently on May 9th. Some members of the GPAC identified some changes they would like to see, relatively minor changes on mapping and on the identification of parcels that were at risk of wildfires. As you heard, we last came before this commission on May 15th. The commission requested some clarification on a few points, especially how law enforcement plays a role in responding to emergencies and how the city coordinates with external agencies for emergency response. The safety element was also reviewed by the State Board of Forestry in June. That is a required part because the city does have some areas that are in a very high fire hazard zone. At that time, the Board of Forestry had some minor suggested changes to the language in the safety element, but they had no formal recommendations to the city. Next slide, please. So we have responded to these changes through a number of minor edits to the safety element. We have added in more information about interagency coordination during emergencies. There is now language in both the safety element and the technical background report that identifies the number of evacuation constrained parcels and the number of parcels that are in fire-prone areas. We have clarified some of the language related to the flood awareness zones and how that relates to the regulatory framework around flooding. There's some revised discussion about infrastructure failure, about recent wildfire events, recent extreme weather events. There is language in the safety element now about the 811 Call Before You Dig program to try and reduce the risk of damage to natural gas pipelines. We have edited some of the policies around evacuation and emergency response, And there have been some other minor tweaks to the mapping in the safety element just for greater clarity and accuracy. So the safety element is subject to review under the California Environmental Quality Act. The project team prepared an addendum to the recent housing element environmental impact report. And the determination is that the safety element does not create any new significant impacts that are identified in that EIR, nor does it substantially increase the severity of any previously identified significant impacts. So if Planning Commission recommends adoption, the staff will hold an initial hearing with the City Council to receive public comments and to provide feedback next week. And then the safety element would return to the City Council for formal adoption at a later date. There is no time frame for the safety element to be adopted. So there is no specific time frame driven by the state that is requiring this process. So the recommendation before you tonight is to receive a presentation summarizing the changes made to the draft safety element in response to comments received, to ask questions of staff, to receive input from the public, to provide any additional changes or edits needed, and then to vote on whether to forward the addendum to the housing element EIR and the draft safety element to the City Council with the recommendation of approval. And that is the end of our presentation tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any clarifying questions? Okay, thank you. Do we have any public comments? Open it for public comments. No, nope. Okay, we'll close public comments. Bring it back to Planning Commission. Any stuff? Commissioner Heising?
Yeah, just a couple comments, no questions. I think I made this comment before at the May 15th meeting. Eli, excellent presentation. I'll note again that I love how you just have everything in your head and you're not reading a script from notes, and you definitely know your stuff. And then also want to thank Arlie and Renata for meeting me with Chief Aldred, because I was the one that brought up some questions, if you recall, about human caused hazards. And so staff and I talked on the phone, we met with the chief, had a Zoom call, and that led to some of these additions to cover coordination with other agencies. So just want to thank staff for that.
Great.
And I'm in full support of moving this forward.
Anyone else?
One thing I was reviewing the latest update, and I was thinking about a couple of issues that have affected cities in the Bay Area recently. Namely, we've had the ransomware attack at Oakland in the last several months that have, dramatically not only exposed, employee data, but also affected their services. And just 2 or 3 days ago, the city of Hayward had a cyber attack that knocked out their police communication services. And I just thinking what that means, and if we think about likely events that are going to affect the city and affect the way that the city can respond to natural disasters, I think that we really should be looking, and I apologize for bringing this up so late in the process, but it's just the last couple of weeks have really brought to my attention that I think the importance of cyber attacks and preventing cyber attacks and ransomware attacks and having that be a part of the city strategy is really important. I can foresee 2 scenarios where they're important. One is a cyber attack itself that actually knocks out the city's computers, the ability for the police, communication to handle routine calls. The worst scenario though would be if that were to happen, and then we would have a national disaster. Basically, all of our planning would be exacerbated because we wouldn't be able to rely on our services, and communication, everything. And again, it's happening in Hayward right now. So it was just kind of a question whether I think including cybersecurity and resilience on that is probably an appropriate spot for something in the safety element, because it seems pretty probably more likely that will affect the city than flood, fire, or earthquake in the next 5, 10, 20 years. So in full disclosure, I did have a chat with the planning director this afternoon about whether this was an appropriate place to put it, and we did agree it's probably a good point to bring up.
Thank you. It is.
Can we refer to because aren't there radios? Isn't the sheriff's department part of what's it called? EBRICS? it's a emergency. So if communications
Mhm.
goes down, computers go down, they would communicate in an emergency situation with the radios. Would that be something that's already in place? Or would we need to add specifically for a cyber attack? That's your recommendation?
That's right. That area should be addressed in the,
Yeah. Okay.
I think it's bigger than just communication.
Yeah.
oh, no,
Yeah.
completely. I'm saying communication is the one thing that really hits.
That's when it's-
Safety, but
yeah.
it's really, it's a bigger problem.
I think it's a good point. I mean, we do have the ability to direct staff to add this and move it on too.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think
Mm.
unless someone, so, but that's a good point. So any other points anyone wants to bring up? Vice Chair.
I have one. I think that was a really smart point to bring up. This is minor, but the interactive safety element map that's linked in the staff report, I personally couldn't get it to work
Oh,
and I had a hard time finding it on the website. So my recommendation would be that link be easily searchable by the public and called out on the city's website really clearly.
Yeah.
Oh, you found it.
Well, I had trouble with it too. On this, I'm not sure. But I had the same trouble when I was reading this over the weekend. So. All right. Any other questions, anyone? I'm assuming assuming we move on, is that enough feedback on those two issues so that we could potentially move this forward with comments and not have to come back?
If the majority of the commission would like language added to the draft safety element regarding cyber attack, we would propose that have some introductory language, acknowledge, speaking to what it is, acknowledging it is an existing and foreseeable issue. And then if you desire to have a policy and or programs, that language that would be added would need to come back to the planning commission. I think August 7 is the contemplated date, if that's the direction. And then you could take action to recommend adoption for the city council.
Okay.
If the majority doesn't support adding additional language, you could take action tonight to recommend
Okay.
adoption.
Commissioner Farsan.
I think cybersecurity is a good thing to bring up. So I work in that field a little bit every day. Unfortunately, sometimes. So, I mean, I think it's a great thing to bring up. I do think like introductory language of its importance, et cetera, would probably cover it. Are you looking for specific action plans? Then I think it's a different issue.
My idea would be, it should be covered at the same level the other items are, which is basically, as I look at, there's kind of introductory framing the situation and kind of the high level approach. But then you leave the details to the IT department, all that kind of stuff. No, you're not, but I think it should be covered. It should be addressed at the same level as the other items in the report.
I think if it's at that level, then you're gonna have to get the IT folks in the city to have their input on kind of that framework.
Well, let's decide and we'll let the city figure out how they're gonna do. I agree.
Yeah,
They'll
just-
figure
yeah.
it out. So
Well, can I ask, a clarifying question? So is it the concern of like the city's IT, or would it be the police force? And, the first responders still being able to communicate with the community?
Right, I mean.
Because those are two different like bodies.
And I
right?
think Commissioner Heising is right. I mean, there probably are mitigating things in place, but I think you just have to be articulated, right? So that when it happens, we kind of have a plan. That's the whole point of the,
playbook, yeah.
Yeah, see how there's policies in.
that's
here?
right.
So I take it staff would come up with a couple policies to throw in to the safety element under these specific goals. Right, so is that what would come back to us? Or can we, because in the staff report, it says item two is, are there any final changes or edits needed to the safety element? If so, can these edits be executed by staff without further review by the commission? So I guess the question is, can those policies, are we comfortable with staff coming up with those policies, inserting them, or do we want to have it come back?
So I'm sorry, go ahead. I was gonna say, my assumption, and please correct me if I'm wrong, the city has to have a cybersecurity plan in place with their IT department. Would I be crazy in assuming that? Because if the answer is yes, that's what we would reference in the policies.
We do have a plan. I don't have specifics on it.
Yeah, I didn't
Um,
expect it, but I'm assuming a city of our size and our resources would have a plan in place, like
Yeah.
a policy.
There, with narrow respect to like internet connectivity, we have redundancies in place. Connections between our points of access so that if one goes down, we could access it through another. So there are, this topic has been considered. There's a plan in place. I can't speak to the specifics of it. Is it a written published document? Don't know, but we can find out. So, and if there's additional language that the commission desires to see, then we would want it to come back for your final eyes on and action.
I think if nothing else, the thing that, great point from Commissioner McCormick, I think the city should definitely have a written policy on cybersecurity protections and setting aside the safety element, but I digress.
Yeah, no, it's a twofer in this
Yeah.
case, yeah.
So it sounds like we've identified that. So what, did you you were gonna say something? Commissioner Mason?
Well, since we're expanding it, I think perhaps first of all, I don't know what information the city has and what doesn't. For example, does the city have locations of all hazardous chemicals stored anywhere in the city? You know, if we're going to limit that cybersecurity, we should be able to have something to address. Doesn't take much hazardous materials to get in the water system, the creek system, to really have a problem. But if
There is a section, yeah, hazardous materials and waste. Yeah. But it's a good point. Do you have other one? I mean, it is good. If there's other things, like clearly cybersecurity is missing. I think we've identified that. There are other ones. Let's
I
get
have
it out.
been scared for 30 years for the two high pressure water lines that are up back against the freeway. Just keep thinking somebody's gonna put a little bomb right at the bottom. And
That's addressed in here, not a bomb. But, yeah. I mean, it talks about not a bomb, but it talks about the surge factor, you know, so.
I had a client that did a project right next to it and their insurance was through the roof.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all. I think that cybersecurity should be addressed. I think it should be worded as broadly as possible because we may not be the subject of attack. We may just be drawn into it by somebody else being attacked and all the overlaying spears.
Vice Chair Radnich?
Well, I realized, maybe this isn't my place to say this, but it sounds like what I'm hearing is that, cybersecurity is something it sounds like we would like to include. And the question is, are we comfortable with staff adding the language? Or do we need to review it? I feel comfortable with staff adding it. That's my
I
stance.
would like to review it.
Oh, you don't have to be sorry.
No, I mean, I can review it individually or I don't have a.
So you can either make a motion or we can, I'm good either way. I'm okay with staff, but I'm not gonna fight.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, okay, then somebody make a motion and let's giddy up. Unless there's more to discuss. I don't want to cut my short. I think we're
Motion.
Right. So just to confirm, right? So we're talking about going back and getting and crafting the section for cybersecurity. Are we approving the rest of it now though, correct? And we'll see the cybersecurity section at the August 7th meeting before the final. Is that I'm trying to get the.
Since there's no timeline. There's no urgency to approve it. I think we
Right.
just get it all back.
When
with
it's ready.
when you make your motion to add that in, and we'll see it all again, right?
Yeah, I don't think,
But,
yeah, I mean, you can make the motion to not do anything else. I don't think there's any value in that. Let's just have them add that, bring it back
Okay.
and we'll vote on it.
I think though, there is a next city council meeting, so we were going to.
That's right.
approve it, And then the additional might come back to us. So I think that's not an urgency issue, but I think it's a planning
We should
for the staff issue, right?
If we add language and bring it back for the commission to consider on August 7, that will meet the timeline for meeting the August 28th meeting for the city council, which is the one meeting in August, which we were targeting in the first place.
Fantastic.
So
Thank you.
hopefully any other issues we brought up tonight. I mean, if you see a, something grossly wrong, by all means, but otherwise it's probably just this subject. So
All right, so I'll make a motion that we should include a section cybersecurity and if the in the safety element and that the is presented to the planning commission on the August 7th meeting for our review.
we have a second?
I'm sorry, could you, if you faded towards the end, include a section on cybersecurity in the safety element?
And present it back and report back to the planning commission on our August 7th meeting for approval.
Continuing this matter to August 7th.
Okay.
Terrific.
Sorry,
Thank you.
continuing this matter to August 7th.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Hey,
All opposed? Motion passes 6-0. All right, nice job. All righty, next on, thank you very much. Thank you. Now we are to other business. Do we have any other business? No. Commissioners report. Do we have any commissioners report?
I do have a brief verbal presentation from Anatole regarding the withdrawn application that was on the agenda.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Sorry to miss my cue there. I just wanted to inform you that this is an application that previously came in back in 2019. It was approved through planning, but the CDs or building permits were never approved and it was never finalized. There were a number of issues between the applicant, the owner, et cetera. And so when the application came in, it was originally accepted as a reapproval. However, it was then realized that it's quite a bit past its expiration date and therefore needs to be a new application. So this reapproval application has been withdrawn and a new application for the original project will come to the planning commission on a future date.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Any, sorry about that. Then with no other business, then commissioners reports. I don't know if, do we have any? Okay, planning directors report.
Nothing to report, no SB 35 applications. And I don't believe any SB 9 applications were filed since your last meeting. However, I did meet with a property owner and they've expressed interest and intention to file a SB 9 lot split application.
Great. I personally would love to hear the nines too here like you just did. Thank you.
Sure thing.
All right, thank you. If that's it, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
You.